Alright, hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about collection views. Okay, so just some review. Can someone tell me what table views are made up of? Anyone want to guess? Anyone have any ideas what table views are made up of? Yes. So which letter? Oh, you mean B?
Yeah.
That's actually not correct. Yeah. Yes, that is correct. So table views have sections, and then those sections have rows that map to table view cells, right? Okay, so can someone else tell me which of these table view methods is optional to implement? Yeah. Yes, that's correct. So the other three we have to implement every time we create a table view, but did select row at we do not have to implement. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about collection views. Collection views are pretty much table views, but with a little bit more functionality. So you've probably seen, if you guys have, for those of you who have iOS devices, have probably seen the Photos app, right? And that Photos app has a grid of all your photos. Now that grid is actually implemented as a UI collection view. And it's pretty much a different way to display large amounts of data, very much like a table view. So yes, we want to remember this keyword grid. Oftentimes, anytime you see a grid in an app, that will be a UI collection view. And it's pretty much the same thing as a table view, but with just a little bit more functionality. Okay, so this is a very familiar screen for you guys. This is a UI collection view, and you can see we have different items here. For table views, we refer to these items as rows, but for collection views, we want to think in terms of items. Okay, so collection views and even table views are actually nestable. So pretty much, here are two example screens. So this is Spotify and this is Netflix. So on the left here for Spotify, we have two different sections of a collection view. So collection views can actually be horizontally oriented or vertically oriented. Very commonly, they're vertically oriented. In this one here, we have two different sections of this collection view. But inside those sections, we also have these horizontally scrollable content, right? And those themselves are also collection views. So it can get pretty nested, and it can be kind of complicated to look through, but collection views can be nested in any way that you like. Yes?
I think these are the two separate collection views, but the same part of the same collection view.
Are you talking? Which screen are you talking about?
Okay, I guess you're talking about the right side.
Yes. So in both cases, we have collection views that are vertically oriented, and then we have these things called items, right? And each item in this collection view is another collection view with more content. So it's very nestable. Okay, so for table views, you guys had to implement the methods of UITableView Datasource, right? So for collection views, thankfully it's pretty similar. So we have UICollectionView Datasource, and whereas with table views we had to implement number of rows in section, now we have to implement number of items in section for collection views. And instead of cell for row at, we now have cell for item at. And yes, like I said before, an item for a collection view is the same thing as a row for a table view. Okay, so the biggest differences between table views and collection views is that a table view is vertically scrollable, right? But a collection view can be either vertically or horizontally scrollable. So we can actually define the scroll direction of a collection view. And we can also adjust both the width and the height of collection view cells. With table views, we can only adjust the height of the cells. But with collection views, we can adjust both the width and the height. And you can actually create a table view with a collection view, but not vice versa. Okay, you can actually implement a protocol called UICollectionView Flow Layout. And what this does is it allows you to actually specify new properties for your collection view. With table view, we didn't have these things because it's just vertically scrollable. But for a collection view, we actually can define the scroll direction, we can define the inter-item spacing, the line spacing, and even the item size inside your collection view. Yeah, so this is the demo that Yana will do for you guys, and it's pretty much the Photos app on iOS, very similar to that. So we're going to implement that using a collection view today.
So the starter code for this is on Piazza under the Resources tab if you guys want to download that to follow along. Like that screenshot showed, this is what we are going to be creating. So it looks very much like the Photos app where you can scroll vertically, and we have these items inside our collection view. So I'm going to open the demo code, or the starter code. Okay, so if you look inside the starter code as is, we have an app delegate where we already configured the first step you always need to do by setting the root view controller, and we used a navigation controller with this view controller as its root. So we also have the view controller file. I'm going to run this just right now just so you guys can see what we're starting with. Okay, so all we have right now is a blank screen, and you see that we're using a navigation controller because you can see the navigation bar at the top, and we've also set the title to be Photos. All right, does everyone have the starter code at this point, or does anyone need a couple more minutes? Cool. So inside our view controller, we already set the title and set the background color, and then we also have this variable called collection view, which we're going to use to create our collection view, and a couple other constants that we're going to use throughout, which you guys will see as we go through the demo. But first, we're going to create a model. So just like in last lecture's demo, we used a cafeteria model. In the projects, you guys should have used a song model. We're going to create a person model for this demo because each one of these collection view cells is a person. So we're going to do File, New File, and because we're creating just a model and not making a subclass of any UI component, we're going to use a Swift file. I'm going to call it Person and just hit Create. So now we have this blank file. I'm just going to start by putting my class up there. All right. So the first step we want to do is define any properties that we want a person to have. So let's say I want my person to have a variable called name that's of type string. And then I also want to associate a person with an image. And I'm not actually going to store the UI image inside my person. I'm just going to store the name of the string. So if you guys go into assets, you'll see that we already put the Bill Gates image and the Melinda Gates image, and Bill Gates is called Bill Gates, Melinda Gates is just called Melinda. So when I say image string, I'm talking about the name of the file inside assets. Cool. And then I have this error, class person has no initializers. So that means we need to write our own custom initializer. And I think there was a little bit of confusion in the project with creating a custom initializer. It's a little different for just a model versus a collection view cell. But for a model, you can just do init, and then the autocomplete will have parameters and statements. So inside the parameters, I want to put the types of the arguments that I need to create a person. So I want to have a name of type string and an image string of type string as well. And then to assign those to my person, I'm going to do self.name is equal to name, and self.imageString is equal to imageString. So this just means I'm storing the value that I pass in when I create my person in my name variable, and the same thing for imageString. Does anyone need any clarification about creating a model? Cool. So now I have my person model. I'm going to go back into View Controller and start to create my View Controller. So if we just do collection view is equal to UI collection view and open the parentheses to look at our options, we have a couple. One of them is an empty constructor. One of them is coder, which is of type NSCoder, which we really will never use. One is frame, and one is frame with another argument that's UI collection view layout. And we're actually going to use this one. So frame we're just going to set to .0, which is literally a frame of size 0, because we're going to use the NS layout constraints. Those will be overridden once we do setup constraints. And then this argument here is something we've never seen before. So like Matthew said, collection views are like a lot more customizable than table views. And you can define kind of the layout, so like the size of your items or the spacing between your items by giving it a layout. So what we're going to do is create a layout variable of type UI collection view flow layout and just use the empty constructor. And then there's a lot of properties of a UI collection view flow layout. We're going to use 3 of them today. The first one being scroll direction, so layout.scroll direction. We're going to set that to be vertically scrolling because we want to scroll through our fake photos app vertically. The other 2 are layout.minimum line spacing. We're going to set that equal to padding, which we defined as a constant at the top of the file over here. And then layout dot minimum inter item spacing, which we're also going to set to padding. All right, I'm going to give you guys a minute to get that down and then switch back over to the simulator to show you what those actually mean. Cool. So minimum line spacing is defined as the spacing in between rows of your collection view. So if we go back to the completed version, each row has cells, and then in between the row, so right here and like here, that's our minimum line spacing. Minimum inter-item spacing is the minimum spacing you must have between items in the same row. So if I look at this first row here, the minimum inter-item spacing is the space between the first Melinda and the first Bill. Cool. Is anyone confused about that? So now that we've set our layout and created our layout, we can just pass layout in that parameter. Now I'm just going to set the background color to be black so that we can see it. And I'm going to do view.add subview collection view. Also forgot to do collection view.translates auto resizes mask. False. Then we already supplied this setup constraints, so we're just going to call that. And if you take a look at the constraints, it just sets padding on the left, top, and right side of the collection view. Cool. So if we run this now, we have our collection view, which we can tell it's there because we made the background color black. But we haven't actually put any items or set like the delegates of or conform to any of the protocols for our collection view. So we actually don't have any items yet in our collection view. But first, we need to create our collection view cells. So just like in table views, we can create custom table view cells. We can create custom collection view cells for the items in our collection view. So in order to do that, you do something very similar to creating a collection view, or a table view cell. You just create a new file. You want to create a Kogo touch class because we're going to make a subclass of UI collection view cell. And I'm going to call my class person collection view cell. Cool. Create that file. Cool. So if we think about our Photos app, our item or our cell is just one image. So the only variable I need inside my collection view cell is an image view. I'm going to call it person image view, and the type is UI image view. Now I'm going to write a custom initializer for my collection view cell. So if I do init and choose one with frame, it automatically inserts the override. First, I'm going to call super.init, so call the superclasses init function, and then I'm going to create my person image view. So person image view is UI image view. I'm going to set the content mode. So in the last lecture we used content mode, and basically that just is how you tell Swift what to do with your image in order to make it fit in your image view. The one you'll probably use the most is scale aspect fill. And this will scale your image, maintaining the ratios so it doesn't get distorted. And then if you do person image view.layer.masks to bounds, true, this will like cut off any part of the image that doesn't fit in your image view. Just gonna add the required thing. Do, as always, translates auto resizing mask to false. And then, just like table view cells, we do content view dot add subview. And I'm gonna add my person image view. And then we need to write our setup constraints function. Setup constraints. And then my image view is going to be the entire size of my cell, so I just need to set my leading, or all of my anchors to equal my content views anchors. So the way when I do this, I like to start and go like around my entire view. So I would do like leading, top, trailing right, or trailing bottom, so that way I don't forget any of them. So we can just do person image view dot leading anchor equal to content views leading anchor, person image views top anchor equal to content views top anchor, and then do the same for trailing, and then the same thing for bottom. And then I want to make sure I call setup constraints in my init. Cool. So does anyone have any questions about constraints? Anyone need a couple more seconds? Cool. So now I've created my custom cell. The next step that I need to do is go back into View Controller, and once again, just like table views, I need to register my cell. So I'm going to do CollectionView.register. I'm going to choose the option that has cell class as its first parameter, and this is the class of the cell that you want to register. So that's person CollectionViewCell.self to refer to the class. And then just like with table views, we don't want to create all of our cells at once because that's like a waste of memory and will make your app really slow. So we only show the ones that fit on the screen, and then we can reuse the ones that we're not using anymore once they disappear off our screen. And we need to use use identifiers just like with the table view cells. And if you look at the top, we already put an identifier inside a constant. And like that's one of the a good practice to follow, because that way, like if you're just typing the string each time, you might like misspell it, and then you're like, what happened? So if you store it in a constant, it helps you make sure you're not messing it up each time. Okay, so now I've registered my cell, and then now we need to move into conforming to the protocols. So the first one we're going to do is the data source. So the view controller, I'm going to do an extension to do this, UICollectionView, and I want data source. So just like we talked about in last lecture with the table view data source, collection view data source is a protocol that defines like the items or the data that you want to display in your collection view. I'm just going to hit fix so it fills this in for me really nicely. So we have two functions, just like table views. We have number of items in section, Instead of number of rows in section, we have items. Once again, the analogy of items for collection views to rows in table views. And then we have cell for item at. So the number of items in section is what we use to determine how many items to display, obviously. But first we need to create the persons array that we want to use as our data source. So I'm going to go back to the top in my view did load and just create some persons. So let's do a bill, and if we type person, we'll see our initializer that we created pop up. So Bill's name is Bill Gates. The image string, once again, is the name of the file in assets. So I believe it was just Bill Gates. And Melinda was, or is, Melinda Gates, and her image string was just Melinda. Cool. So now I'm going to create an array of Bills and Melindas. Let persons equal. So I'm going to do 3 Bills followed by 3 Melindas. Then I'm just going to copy this, paste it a couple more times for good measure. So now we have an array of 3 Bills, 3 Melindas, 3 Bills, 3 Melindas over and over and over again. So this is the data that we want to display in our collection view. So if we go back to number of items in section, I want to get the number of persons I have in my persons array. Does anyone remember how we did this for table views, or has an idea how we would do this for the demo right now? Okay, so we want to return the number of persons we have in our persons array. So we're going to do return persons.count, except this is going to yell at me because I didn't make persons a global variable. So I created my persons array in here, so it can't refer to it outside. So I'm just going to make persons a class variable, and then set remove the let and just do persons is equal to. Cool. So the error down here went away, and now I just return the number of persons in the array. And then we have to fill in cell for item at. So just like with table views, we use the DQ reusable cell. So I'm going to do let cell equal CollectionView.DQ. So I want to use DQ reusable cell. And then we have the same parameters as we did for table views. The reuse identifier is the one we stored in this variable, person cell reuse identifier. And then for the index path variable, I'm just going to pass it in index path. Now, just put return cell for a minute to get rid of that error. Now, the problem here is I still haven't figured out how I can configure my person collection view cell for whatever person I want it to display. Does anyone remember how we did this for the cafeterias? How we got like a cell to be custom to one of the restaurants or dining halls in our data? Yeah.
So we passed in the cafeteria object to configure function?
Yeah, that's right. So we need to go back to person collection view cell and write a configure function. So I'm just going to call it configure. And since I want to configure for a person, I'm just going to use for person and then of type person. Cool. So my person object had 2 properties. It had a name and it had an image string. And for the case of my cell, all I want to do is get that image string so I can get the correct image to display in my image view. So I'm just going to get the image string from the person using the dot notation. And then my image view was called person image view. And I can just do dot image, and I can set that equal to, if you do UI image, you'll see that one of the constructor options is UI image named string. So you can just pass in the name of the image inside assets and it'll get the correct one for you. So I'm going to do image string because that's what we stored inside this value. Cool. So does anyone have any questions about the configure function or why we needed it? Yeah.
Just in general, when do you know like when to use 4 versus 2 when you're writing?
It's kind of just like how you would say it in English. So I'm configuring something for something versus like change text. I'm not changing it text for something. I'm changing it to something. Cool. So now I can go back into View Controller. If I just did cell.configure, it doesn't come up. And that's because when you do DQ reusable cell, the return type is just a UICollectionViews cell. And a general UICollectionViews cell doesn't have that custom configure function that we just wrote. So we need to cast this as our person collection view cell. And then if we come back to here and we do configure, we'll see this pop up. And then does anyone remember how I can get the item in the array that corresponds to my item or row? Yeah. So we have persons, then we have index path, but there's actually one more thing that we need. .row. Yeah. So cell.configure for persons, index path .row. Is anyone confused on what that does? Cool. So now we've implemented these functions. The last thing we need to do right now is go back up to our collection view and set the data source. So collection view.datasource. And because I am using my current view controller as the data source for my collection view, I'm using self to say, oh, I'm the data source for the collection view. Cool. Now, if we run this right now, if I didn't miss a step, we should hopefully see some pictures. Yeah. So we have 3 Bills, 3 Melindas, 3 Bills, 3 Melindas, but they're really small. So we want it to look like on the left, but we have these really tiny ones instead over here. So this is just like height for row at in table view cells. So height for row at technically isn't required for you to implement, but we said you should always because otherwise you're going to have this dilemma. So if we go back to collection view, the size for an item in your collection view is defined in a method in a different protocol. So that's, we're going to do another extension to conform to this protocol that we want, which is UICollectionView Delegate Flow Layout. So like flow layout implies, this protocol kind of has all the functions for determining how to lay out items in your collection view. So stuff like the size. So if you just do, so you'll see like it's not yelling at me like it did for Datasource because none of the functions are required to be implemented. And if you don't implement them, they'll use the default values. So the tiny size that we had was the default value that they had. But we want to make it larger. So if you just type size for item at, the first one that comes up is the one that we want to override. And we see that the return type is a CG size. So let's just do return CG size and see what we need to provide CG size. Whoa. So I need a width and a height. And since my images are squares, these are going to be the same value. But I need to determine what value I want to use. So if we look back at this, we'll see that I have a cell, then I have some padding space, I have a cell, and then I have a padding space, and then I have another cell. So I have this entire width of my collection view, and subtract these two paddings will give me the total space that the cells take up. And if I divide that by 3, I'll get the size of the item. A little confusing. I'll write it out here. So we want it to look like cell, padding, cell, padding, cell, cell is equal to width. So if I do, I'm just going to do let size equal. To get the total width of the collection view cell, or the collection view, you can do collection view dot frame dot width. And then the next thing I want to do is subtract these two padding amounts. And where that padding came from is when we set minimum inter-item spacing before, and we set that to be the padding constant that we have. So I'm going to subtract 2 times that padding amount. And then this value gives me the total space that just cells take up minus the padding. And then divide that by 3, since I wanted 3 cells per row. Does everyone understand the math behind that, or want me to kind of show it again? Cool. So now I have the size of my cell. I'm just going to pass that in for both the width and the height because it's a square. Okay. So next, I need to go back up to where I created my collection view. So I did Datasource before. In order to get the UI collection view delegate flow layout to kind of connect, we need to set the delegate to be ourself too. Now, if we run this, our images are bigger. So that's the right size. Does anyone have any questions about that? Cool. So the next thing we want to do is, just like table views where you can connect an action to when you tap on a row, you can connect an action to when you tap on an item in a collection view. So I actually set this up so that when I tap on one of these cells, it changes to the opposite person. Yeah, so like I can make them all Melinda if I wanted to. But yeah, so whenever I tap on one of these cells, it's calling a function called didSelect. In table views, it was didSelectRowAt. With the analogy for collection views, the function that we want to override is called didSelectItemAt. So this function is in yet another protocol. So we're going to create another extension. And this one is called UICollectionViewDelegate. Just like in table views, it was called UITableViewDelegate. And the function is called didSelectItemAt. Cool. So now in here, I want to write my logic for figuring out what person it is and then changing the person to the other one. So I can get the current person using indexPath.row again. So that's the current person in this cell. And then I'm going to do if person, and remember we had a name property for our person, so I'm going to check the name and see if it's Bill Gates. And then I also have an else because the only other option would be if it was Melinda. Now I want to reassign my person in my array to be the opposite person. So I'm going to do persons indexPath.row is equal to, I'm going to do Melinda, and otherwise it's going to be Bill. Now the problem here, I think, is I have these errors again, and that's because we made Melinda and Bill locally in the view did load. So once you guys get that down, we'll fix this error. So if we go back up to view did load, I created Bill and Melinda as lets in here, so I can't access them. So this is like the same issue we had before with the persons array. So I'm just going to make Bill and Melinda up here so that I can access them in that function. And then instead of let, we're just going to do Bill and Melinda. So does everyone see why I had to do that there? Yeah. So now those errors go away and I switch my person. So now if I were to run my code, do you guys think if I tapped on a cell it would change the person? Anyone have any guesses or want to explain their intuition? Yeah.
You have to call reload data.
Yeah, so just like table views, collection views have something called reload data. So when you first create a collection view and you set the data source, it'll look at that like array, fill in all of its items, and then it stops looking at the array basically. Any updates you make to the array won't be automatically reflected in your collection view. And in order to get your collection view to update, you need to call reload data. So now if we run this, and I tap on a person, it switches to the opposite person. Nah. Do some fun patterns with it. Cool. So does anyone have any questions about anything we've done so far? Awesome. So the next thing that's missing, we see that we have this kind of sad header view that just says, this is my header view. So you'll see that like it's connected to the cells. So like Matthew said in the demo, we can have sections inside a collection view, and you can set kind of like a header for a section. So the header for, well, we only created one section, but the header for this is this view here that's just white with this label on it. So in order to create the header, you need to create a custom view for it as well. So the header views, or you could also do a footer view, is very similar to creating a custom cell, except when you create your new file, you're going to do a Cocoa Touch class again. Instead of UICollectionView cell, you're going to subclass Reusable View. Just going to call it header view. So you'll use like reusable views if you do like a header or if you do a footer. They're kind of all subclass the same thing. Next, and create that. So I have another file called header view. In my sad little header view, I just had a label. So I'm going to create a label of type UI label. And then I'm going to create an initializer. And just like we did for the collection view cell, we're going to call this super init. The super class is init first. And then pretty standard at this point, we're just going to create our UI label. My label's text. I had this is my header view. I'm going to center my label.text. I'm going to set the alignment of my text to be centered, and then NS text alignment is an enum with a couple different options. We're just going to do center. I'm going to do translates into false. And then let's just silence that for a second. Cool. And then we need to add it to our subview. And this is where it's a little different than something we've done before. So in a view controller, we did view.addSubview. In a collection view cell, we did contentview.addSubview. And that's because inside a view controller, there's a root view that you're adding everything to. In a collection view cell, that root view is just identified with content view. A UI collection reusable view, or even just like a normal UI view, note that it's UI view and not view controller. There's no notion of a root view, and like your class is its own view. So instead of doing view.addSubview, we just do addSubview. And I'm adding my label. You can kind of think of this as if you were doing self.addSubview, but typically we don't use self. Unless we really need it. So like in the cases where we're assigning to our own variables with the same argument names like we did in person. So we had to use self.name equals name here because we had variables that were named the same thing. Or like when we do .delegate equals self, we'll use the self keyword. But typically we won't use it in other cases. And then I need to set some constraints. So I'm just going to write a constraint function. I'm just going to do really easy constraints where they're constrained to all four sides, just like we did for the image view. So ns layout constraint activate. Cool. So starting with leading. Constraint. I'm just going to use equal to. And then similarly, we don't have any view or content view to access, and we're just accessing our own anchors. So you could do self.leadingAnchor, but that would be equivalent to, let's say for top anchor, I did constraint equal to. That would be equivalent to doing like top anchor without self. So doing self.leadingAnchor or just leading anchor, those are both equivalent. We also need the trailing anchor. I'm going to do and then the bottom anchor. And then I'm going to go back up here and just make sure I call setup constraints. Cool. So does everyone understand what's happening in here? Everyone like kind of clear on why we just have add subview? Cool. So if we go back to view controller, like I said, using like a header view is very similar to using a cell, and we need to register a header view. So if you go back in here, I'm going to do CollectionView.register. And you'll see in addition to cell class, which is the one we used before, we have this one called view class, which is the one you'll use to register any header views or footer views that you use. We're going to do the class, so that's headerView.self. So this is another like instance we'll use the self keyword to refer to the class. And then we have this argument for supplementary view of kind. So like I've been saying, a collection view can have a couple supplementary views, such as a header or a footer, and you need to specify the kind of supplementary view that you're registering your view for. So if you do UICollectionView dot, I think it's element, yeah. So you have, these are types of element categories. So we have element kind section footer and element kind section header. So we're going to use the header one because we're creating a header view. And then supplementary views are also dequeuable, so we need a reuse identifier, and we have a variable at the top that has header reuse identifier in it, so that's what I'm going to use here. Awesome. So I've registered. So the next step, just like the next step for a actual cell, is to do it in Datasource. So if I go to Datasource, there should be, if you type like supplementary, just pick the first one, yeah. View for supplementary element of kind. So this is where we're going to provide the view that we want to use for the header. We're going to do let header equal CollectionView.dequeue. And we'll see there's two options for dequeuing. One's a reusable cell and one's a reusable supplementary view. So we're going to use this one. We have this of kind parameter again. So that's where we do the element type or kind. So UICollectionView dot element kind section header. The reuse identifier, which we stored in header reuse identifier, and index path. And then just like we did for the cells, we want to make sure it's of our own like special custom class that we created. And then just return your header. So we don't have any like configuring to do like we did in our cell, but you could if you wanted to, and you just do that like before you returned it. Cool. Does anyone have any questions about the header so far? Cool. So if I run this now, we actually won't see our header yet. So my collection view still starts at the very, very top like we did before. And that's because we need to specify the height. Just like we needed to specify the item size, we need to specify the height of the header. And the default value for this is 0, which is why it's not showing up right now. So if we go back into flow layout, once again, layout is the one that has kind of the sizes of all your stuff. Type size for header, yeah. Reference size for header in section is the name of this one. And then it takes CG size as its return type again. So return CG size. We need to give it a width and a height. And I want my header to take up the entire width of my collection view. Does anyone remember how we got the width of the collection view before? It's up there a couple lines above. Collection view dot frame dot width. So you could do height, but we're just using width. And then the height we actually already stored in a variable called header height. If you scroll to the top of the file, you'll see we put X amount of pixels for the header height. So now if we run this, cool. So we obviously have some sort of header there because we now have that big black gap at the top, but our label isn't showing up. And this is because we set the background of our collection view to be black. We have black text in our header view, so you're not going to see black on black text. So what we want to do is go back to our header view class. Looks a little ugly, but I'm just going to set the background color to be white. And just like before, we didn't do view.addSubview, we don't need view.background color, we just do background color. So now if we run this, we have our header view and you can see the text on it. And if you scroll, you'll see like the header is connected to the section. And we have our did select functionality. So yeah. One other thing I just want to show is it's really easy to flip the scroll direction using the layout that we defined before when we created our collection view. So if we go back to view controller and go to where we created our layout variable, we had layout.scrollDirection equals vertical, and it's really easy if you just change that to horizontal to make it horizontally scrolling. Because we set our constraints for everything thinking it was going to be vertical, it's going to look a little funky. Yeah. So you can scroll horizontally. It looks really ugly because the sizes of everything is messed up now. But yeah. So your header view goes to the left. And since we set it to be the entire width, it takes up the entire screen when you first open it. And then remember that layout had these line spacing and inter-item spacing properties. And the keyword here is that they're minimum. So we'll see that the minimum inter-item spacing that we specified was still satisfied because it could fill the entire width with that inter-item spacing. But because our spacing was a little incorrectly calculated to go vertically this way, to be this horizontally scrolling thing, it didn't keep the minimum, but it made it larger. Because it would never go smaller then, but it got bigger then. Cool. So does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
My header is not showing up. What could be something like this?
Did you add it to your subview?
Okay.
This is good debugging. I always check. I always forget add subview. So I always go back and make sure I do that first. If it's not that, you might have forgotten to do translate auto resizing mask to false.
Oh, you mean
within the header view. Oh, do you have the gap at the top at all?
No, the cap is not there.
Okay, so let's go back to view controller. So we define the height of that inside collection view data source inside this function here. Or no, inside flow layout with reference size for header in section. Do you have this function?
Yes.
Did you do header instead of footer?
Oh, I did footer.
There we go. So yeah. Any more questions? Yeah.
What was the reason you said you didn't use view.addSubview and view.background color yet?
Yeah, so a view controller, which is what we've been used to using, has a root view that belongs to it, which is where we add all of our items to, and we access the root view by using the view keyword. But if we're creating, this is a subclass of UI collection reusable view, or in general, if we had just a UI view and not view controller, then, or UI views in and of themselves are views, so we don't have to access any sort of root view to add things to. So it's basically like saying I'm adding a subview to myself, but we just omit the self keyword whenever it's not necessary. Cool. Any other questions? Cool. So if we go back to Keynote, the only action item we have is Project 5 will be released tonight and is going to be due Sunday the 3rd It's going to be November. Wow. So Sunday, November 3rd at 11:59 p.m. Once again, if you need an extension, please remember to ask for it at least 24 hours in advance on Piazza with a private post. Because if you email us, we may or may not see it. So the best way is through Piazza. Well, so that's all for today.